make of me a shine love for the master. Lord, in the mighty of the powerful, amen.
Way to go, Rory.
And say here in Bahasa Malaysia, is there any renewable Phuket? So let's pray. Adakah penghalang kesukaran selain Tuhan? Katakanlah terpujilah Tuhan. Ya Tuhan, semua hamba-Nya dan semua tunduk pada perintah-Nya. Adakah penghalang kesukaran selain Tuhan? Katakanlah terpujilah Tuhan. Ya Tuhan, semua hamba-Nya dan semua tunduk pada perintah-Nya.
This is a prayer from the Bob, and this is in the language of the Northern Shoshone people from my homeland, which is the Yukon Territory in Canada. Te Janakni o Taringi, Oka, Najig, Dahaju, Yatanadru, Nankashu, Agi o Taringi, Tlahuagi, the Tatnagi, Keaki oyaki natsat ayatsacho natsat aling.
You're muted, Feroz, you're muted.
What would I do without you? Thank you. I just wanted to thank everyone who said a prayer, as well as all of you who joined us tonight. Tonight is a special night. I've been trying to have Dr. Williams here for the past year and a half, and it never materialized. And for some reason, I was lucky enough that this week we were able to have him with us tonight. His bio is very short, and I just read it for you. Dr. Kendal Williams is a clinical professor of medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. He has 4 children and lives in the Philadelphia area. He's been a Baha'i formally for over 40 years. I didn't think he was older than 40 years anyways. And his topic will be the Baha'i Faith, a religion that is real and true. Thank you so much for accepting to be here. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Feroz, and I'm sorry it took so long to make it work. I've had a busy year, but it's wonderful to be here to share some thoughts with such a diverse and beautiful audience from all over the world. I had no idea what to expect because Feroz's email came through Facebook out of the blue, but it's wonderful to be here. Feroz, just some technical things. I assume I haven't used, I downloaded the app on Zoom, and so I should be sharing my slide, right?
You are a co-host right now, and you can do whatever you want. Yes.
Okay, so I am going
Why
to
don't you
share.
remove? Yeah. Okay,
and then hit slideshow.
absolutely.
And my hope is that you will be seeing my slides. Is that right?
It looks
We
good.
can see,
All right,
Oh.
very good.
yes, yes.
All right. So, I've given some talks, and I think this is how Firuz knew me, for modern Baha'i Faith, modern perspectives on different topics. But one of the topics I never actually got to was just about the truth of the Baha'i Faith. The thing that most attracted me to the Baha'i Faith was because it just rang true. And then I spent the better part of the next 20 years testing that idea, studying it more, testing it, because my own knowledge of the world and the philosophies of the world and the religions of the world and the science of the world was growing as my understanding of the faith was growing. And so, you know, what was a wonderful journey, both spiritual and intellectual. The faith is the most intellectually stimulating body of truth I've ever known. And it's so universal and comprehensive and amazing, and magnificent is the word I use. That's what I've come to sort of say. People ask me, you know, what's the Baha'i Faith? I say, it's a magnificent religion. And, you know, because I just, it's true. And as I've gotten older, I feel more and more comfortable just saying what I think. I don't know if some of you other had that experience, but, you know, and so I tell people, and I'm not as concerned if they necessarily respond to it, but I'm just going to give them what I think. So let's start with the basic truths of the Baha'i Faith. And then I want to get into this whole idea of reality, truth, belief, how those three mix together, and how they relate to the Baha'i Faith. Because if you read the Baha'i writings, truth, reality come up a lot. What doesn't come up is belief, but it does come up. But reality and truth is throughout the writings. Okay, let's talk about the basic truths of the Baha'i Faith. There is one God who is the ultimate source of all reality. The great religions of humankind have come from the same God and are all a reflection of the divine will. So this is a religion that teaches that all of the great religions of humanity are really reflecting the same divine teachings and the divine will. However, the world changes all the time. Change is inevitable. And because of that, the revelations of God that come to humanity also need to adapt to that change and adapt their standards to the age in which they appear. This is a concept in the Baha'i Faith known as progressive revelation, and it is still my favorite idea ever because it captures so many, well, we're going to get into it, but it explains so much about the world. And about religion in particular. Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i Faith, revealed a religion that represents the standards of God for our age and time and history. We are living in the time of Baha'u'llah. Whether we know it or not, the standards that he revealed are how the world works right now. They're, if we're living under different standards, older standards, we're not really living to the maximally to the world as it is today. Baha'u'llah taught that the central principle of his revelation, of his religion, is the oneness of humanity. So I want to say a few words about Baha'u'llah, who, you know, is just magnificent, I suppose. I use that word again. Baha'u'llah claimed to be the bearer of a revelation from God for our time in history. And as I said before, explained that all the great religions, all the great revelations, this is a word Baha'is use, revelations are sort of the totality of what a prophet or a messenger of God speaks to the world, and the impact in some ways on the world. So, for instance, we might talk about the revelation of Jesus. By that, we might mean his words as recorded in the Gospels of Jesus, and we might say that's his revelation. But we also know that his revelation created a church that promoted his religion, created a whole infrastructure and so forth. And that's all sort of part of his revelation as well. Baha'u'llah said that the purpose of these revelations and of religion itself is the unity of the human race. And throughout the Baha'i writings, they uphold the core principles of science and rational thought. And we'll get into that in a little bit. So I want to see if I can, oops, did I just, sorry, I was trying to do something and there we go. I'm still screen sharing. When I first became a Baha'i, I was deeply affected by this quote, where Baha'u'llah explained his religion, and he simply said, "This is the changeless face of God, eternal in the past and eternal in the future," which was such a beautiful idea because it says two things. It says that there's an eternal aspect to these revelations of God, and in that way, they're not changing. But it's an ironic statement too, because Baha'u'llah also teaches they specifically do change. But on another level, a higher level, they are all simply representations on earth of what is a changeless faith. And I found that very beautiful. So the Baha'i community, as represented in this call itself, is extraordinarily diverse. It's the most diverse organized group of people on the planet. It is established in virtually every country of the world. We are not a big religion, but we are extraordinarily diverse and extraordinarily dynamic, as anyone knows who has spent time with Baha'is. And so what I wanted to talk to you about tonight is something I have been thinking a lot about over the last year. Some ideas have come to my head about belief, reality, and truth. And I want to start with a few basic sort of definitions, if you will. So a belief is a subjective idea, meaning it's an idea that you have and you may share with others. If that's the case, that it's an intersubjective idea, but it nevertheless is a subjective idea about how you think the reality of the world works. Okay. Some beliefs, some people might hold their beliefs not because they particularly think that they match the reality of the world. That may be a lower priority for them. It may give them some comfort on some level. And they like living in the world of that belief. Our beliefs define our world. They define the communities in which we interact. They define our interpretation of the world, and they may give us great comfort as well. So they function in many roles, and I'm not down on subjective beliefs. I have them, a lot of them myself, and there are some that I find very comforting. And so, but nevertheless, I recognize they are subjective. And so there's the belief. So that's belief. A true belief, however, produces real results in the real world. Okay, that is, true beliefs are productive because they match with reality. So, this goes back, I was thinking about this issue, basically reflecting on a passage in the Gospels where Jesus is asked about how the people will know in the future the people who represent his return. And he said that they shall bear fruits, right? And as I studied the Baha'i writings, I thought more and more, there's a lot about fruits and being productive and producing things in the world. And that began to sort of bounce around my mind a little bit, that because I'm a scientist and I spend a lot of time looking at scientific studies. When I say I'm a scientist, my career has gone through different stages. I'm mostly a clinician right now, and I do a fair amount of teaching. But I used to run something called the Center for Evidence-Based Practice. And what we would do there was really look at the scientific evidence for particular questions that were brought to our center. And so we would study the medical literature and the clinical trials and other studies that were done to try and determine what was the support for a particular drug or technology or something else. So we did a lot of, and I had a little, early in my career, I did a lot of teaching of other doctors about how to read scientific studies. And so I thought a lot about science back in the day and sort of the methodology of science. And, you know, what science does is it really is a systematic way to test our beliefs, which may or may not be true, against reality to determine truths, right? And so, and in a sense, we are trying to determine if a certain belief is productive. Say I have a belief that exercise is good for me, and I believe that, and I exercise because it feels like it should be good for me. But I actually want to, I want to see if that's true, right? And what I mean by that is, you know, does my exercising every day or every few days, you know, make a difference in the real world? Does it change the outcomes? Does it have productive value? So then I set about doing a study to compare two groups who exercise and who don't exercise. I do some statistical testing to determine if the results I get are by chance or if they actually represent a significant difference between the groups that would basically ultimately determine whether or not the idea that exercise is of value to me produces real results in the real world, right? And if I do a number of studies and I come to the conclusion by these studies that exercise is very beneficial and you should do a lot of it and so forth, you know, then I have a truth, right? And so progress is really, especially scientific progress, but all forms of material progress, and I would argue even spiritual and social progress, are essentially discovering more truth about reality and using that for productive results. So truth itself is productive, right? It produces real results in the real world. Now, there's a beautiful quote of Abdu'l-Baha, who is the son of Baha'u'llah, in which he says quite challengingly that any religious belief which is not conformable with scientific proof and investigation is superstition. For true science is reason and reality, and religion is essentially reality and pure reason. Therefore, the two must correspond. Okay? So Abdu'l-Baha, I think, was telling us here that the expectation is that our religious beliefs should correspond to reality, i.e., that they should be true, right? And that they should produce productive results in the real world, like scientific truths do, okay? So now I want to, I'm showing you this picture because my son and I, my wonderful son, Keon, who is 26 years old, he's in fantastic physical shape, and he hikes and bikes all over the place. He's currently in London for the year doing a master's. And so I, like many fathers who have young sons who have flown the coop, want to spend as much time as I can with my son. But I don't get as much time as I'd like. That old Cats in the Cradle song, and some of you may know it. It's really true. Once your kids go out, you know, it's the dad that really asks you, hey, son, when are you coming home? So I decided to meet him where he is and go to England, and we would hike in Scotland. And so I had this somewhat stupid idea to actually do this 96-mile route in Scotland called the West Highland Way on a bike, because I thought it would be quicker and it would be more fun. It turned out to be very difficult. So he and I set about, and we were for several days I was using this bike it's shown, and we were trying to bike over that kind of surface. And so I thought a lot about this talk while I was doing that bike ride. And one of the analogies that I came up with was the tread on the tires. And so it's actually a good analogy. So because we were constantly focused on how well we had grip on the road, right? And so this bike had pretty good grip. It was a relatively new bike that I was able to get from Glasgow. But in any case, if you have true beliefs, then you're going to have a lot of grip on the road, right? Your beliefs, meaning your bike, matches with the reality of the road, and you get a good grip on it. So you're going to make a lot of progress, But if you have bald tires where they're not really getting a grip on the road, you're not going to make a lot of progress, right? And so it's very important that our beliefs match with reality, because if are true, because if they don't match with reality and are not true, we're not going to make the kind of progress that we can truly make. Now, belief is not such a thing that is black and white, right? That may be true in some cases. Some beliefs are frankly wrong, but and don't match with reality at all. But a lot of beliefs partially match with reality. And a lot of belief systems partially match with reality, and people make a great deal of progress with that. It's the equivalent of having semi-bald tires. You're still making pretty good progress, but not quite as much as if your beliefs really matched with that. I hope that analogy is helpful to you. I thought of it when I was biking on this long journey, 12 hours a day. That's what I came up with. And we finished this wonderful bike ride. There's my son Keon on the right, in a town in north of Scotland. And when you finish the West Highland Way, you have to take a picture at this bench with this statue guy. So we did that and called it a done deal. But it was a lot of fun. But I thought a lot about this talk when I was doing this bike ride. So that's what I want to share with you. And I thought a lot about those tires and how they match with this idea of truth, reality, and belief, right? Now, the other thing I think is true here is that reality always wins, okay? So there's a lot of debate in our society about a lot of different things. And I'm a doctor, and I do a lot of primary care now. And I have patients coming in, and they're asking me about different things, and they have different beliefs about stuff. And, you know, but I always come back to this idea that, sometimes they don't agree with what I say, which is fine, or they want to do something else, and that's fine too. But I always think to myself, I don't say this, but I think to myself, you know, in the end, reality is going to win. It doesn't really matter what you believe, or even what I believe. I would like to think that what I believe is based on, you know, good science, that we've done studies to demonstrate that this has value in the real world and it's recommended to you. But either way, reality is going to win out, right? So if we can get closer to the reality of things, we can make more progress, is the point. Okay? Now, religion has historically made claims to truth, and people believe they were true, right? So if you go back and talk to a 13th century European and ask them if the stories in the Bible were true, literally true, they would almost certainly say they were. So religion was really felt to be a statement of truths, literal truths, right? And so even sometimes not metaphorical truths, but quite literal. So in many ways, this changed for Western civilization, for, you know, what's mostly Christianity, but also to some degree, Jewish and Islamic society as well. In the 19th century, when, you know, more and more people were turning away from the idea that religion was actually reflected reality. And it was challenged very fundamentally by philosophical thinkers of the Enlightenment, and subsequently folks like Freud and Nietzsche and all of the atheists of the 19th century that we know of. You know, Nietzsche is one of the most interesting, I think, because Nietzsche was born very much a believer. And what shook his belief most was biblical historical studies that suggested that not all the stories in the Bible were literally true. And it shook his belief so much that he went completely the other way, became an atheist philosopher, and famously said, God is dead. And I think it's a very interesting statement, actually, because what he meant is that for rational people, the idea of God is a dead idea. Now, of course, he was in European society. European society had specific ways to believe about God. And were not universal and so forth. So there's a lot of problems with that being said on a universal level. But it nevertheless, I think, reflected the idea that for much of the sort of intellectuals of Europe at that period of time, they were no longer believing what they had received in the past to be true, right? And so that phenomenon really affected the entire intellectual community. I mean, if you look at the universities and many of the great thinkers that before that period, they all came out of Catholic universities or the great universities in the Islamic civilization. The universities were really founded by the church, right? And so, the centers of learning in Europe throughout its, centuries of growth and development, really were sponsored by religious institutions. And so this was the first time that they were really challenging that on a very fundamental level, right? And I think their challenge, at least for Christianity, was a successful one because they really did cause, I think, intellectually and socially, religion to somewhat go underground. And there was an uncoupling with truth from religion and religious ideas, in such that people no longer felt the need, at least publicly, to explain their religion as if it were a reality. They would attract people to their religion based on some aspects that might not be testable, but more on emotion, more on maybe just the simple attraction of the beauty of the ideas that are in the Gospels and in the Quran and other places. But they weren't arguing that their religions were necessarily reflective of reality, right? And so in the Western societies, to me, this is my subjective perspective, we no longer even ask the question in a public forum. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One of the reasons is we want to be respectful of each other, and we don't want to cause religious contention. So we don't ask the honest questions about our beliefs. But it also has, I think, led to this uncoupling of, real dialogue about the reality of religion and the actual practice of religion. And I think it in religion has become tribal, where you're not allowed to ask questions about people's beliefs. But, people share subjective beliefs within a particular tribe. And so it becomes more of a subjective judgment and something affiliations, mostly because people were born into them, right? So this plays out a lot, and it's playing out right now in our world, particularly in the alignment of, sort of Judeo-Christian backgrounds with Islam and the Islamic world. And as they become really closer together, more Muslims, folks of Muslim background come to traditionally Christian countries, are changing the dynamic in those countries and really challenging, I think, the basis of these countries. Because even though places like America and Canada said that they were based secular societies that were open to all religions, they really had sort of, when they first started, everybody was Christian or everybody was Christian and Jewish. And so, having these things come in has led to this clash of civilizations. But it's not the clash of ideas, right? It's a clash of tribal affiliations mostly. And nobody in all of this talk ever asks the question or even discusses, is it actually true? I mean, is religion actually true, right? And so I thought a lot about whether I was going to put this slide in here, but I want to sort of put you back a little bit because I decided to put it in because I want to ask the question, if we take these individual religions, which are the historic great religions of humanity, and we put them to the test and we say, are they true? Does their theology, does it make sense to us as modern people, right? And so, and I'm saying this out loud, but certainly I will say in my own heart, as I explored religion I was asking this question, and I'm sure many people are, as they explore religion as well, right? We may not talk openly in public about it, but we all ask the question, right? So if you look at the great religion of Judaism, which is a foundational religion to everything that came out after it, produced a wonderful civilization. The Hebrew civilization had just an impact that has, reverberated through the centuries and has beautiful texts in its source work. But if you take the modern Jewish theology and you think about it, it is that God presented himself to a group of people 3,000 years ago, and that, those folks are in some way special because of that, and that one day he will come back and redeem the rights of those folks. And so when I look at that as a modern person, I struggle with that because, and I'll say why in a minute. Christianity, of course, is a beautiful religion. I grew up with a Christian background and read the Gospels as a child and read them as an adult and still read them and know them well and have read them several times and thought about them a great deal over the years. Christianity is a beautiful, beautiful religion, and I see the impacts on my Christian brothers and sisters. I've gone to Bible study with my Christian brothers and sisters, but I struggle with the theology because the theology in the modern day is that Christ is the only way to God. That's what you will hear in most. Now, of course, there's a spectrum of Christian denominations, but traditional Christian belief is that Christ is the only way to God. And I struggle with that because Christianity is at this point a fairly old religion. And there have been great religions after Christianity, including the Baha'i Faith. And so that I can't necessarily come to terms with the fact that Christianity is the only truth because I see so much truth in the other great faiths, and including the Baha'i Faith, which seems to mirror so many of the beautiful things and expand upon many of the things in the Christianity. Islam is also incredible religion that is the most universal of those three, accepts both Christianity and Judaism as being religions of God, was commanded, Muslims were commanded to protect the rights of Christians and Jews that lived in their societies, and produced a flourishing civilization for 700 years. And so there's so much to appreciate about Islam. And of course, the Baha'i Faith grew in some ways out of that rich environment that the Islam produced. But again, we have a belief that that Muhammad is the last prophet, a traditional belief within Islam, and that it's a perfect religion, and that nothing can come after it. But I struggle with that as a modern person because Islam is less and less impactful on the world, and doesn't seem to be ascending in its force. Hinduism is also a great religion, and the religion of India in many ways. And I studied Hinduism, was very impacted by the Bhagavad Gita. But again, we get to some of the similar issues with the other three, and that is they feel a little old. Hinduism was more universal in some ways and focused more on individual spiritual development, which I found very universal, and always has had a very universal perspective, but does seem to be an older religion. I went back and read the Buddhist texts, which came out of Hinduism, and I read them in as close to the originals as I can get, the Pali Canon. And it's really wonderful to read. And you can see how the ideas that are presented in Buddhism really flourished within other mystical traditions, including the Baha'i Faith. But I struggle with seeing it as a modern religion, given the fact that it doesn't seem to have much impact on the countries that identify themselves as Buddhist. So, I have my own struggles. That's why I said I hesitated to put this slide together. This is my own subjective beliefs. I'm not making any claims. But I think that, when we ask ourselves, are things true? I think we have to ask, are they producing productive results in the real world? And although certainly they all are and continue to have impacts on the societies and beautiful impacts and important impacts, I don't feel that they feel like that they are all to some degree in the past. So when I think about what would make a true religion, and what I was attracted to that seemed to me to be the most sensible is it had to be universal. So there's a beautiful quote from Abdu'l-Baha that captures this idea, but I realized as I read that quote that this was something that I had sort of intuitively thought. Because if you believe that all these religions or any religion is from God, God is universal, right? There isn't anything more universal than the concept of God, right? So the concept of one God creating everything that exists, including my cup of water here and everything else, any religion that claims to be from that has to be able to speak to a universal perspective. Its ideas have to be universal. And I think that's what I have in terms of the theology, the modern theologies of the religions I mentioned on the previous slide, is they're just not universal enough. I mean, we live in a world that is so is interconnected and universal, and I just don't find them to be quite as universal. And I think that's one of the main problems I have, because to me it says the modern world is a universal world. It's an interconnected global world. A true religion to me also needs to make sense. It has to, by that, I mean, it's sort of intuitively, it's presented in a rational way, drawing on rational principles and explaining itself in ways that people can understand, right? And all scientific theories do that. They're based on rational principles. They're built off of rational thinking and so forth. So it can't be, it can have an emotional component, certainly, but it should also be explainable to somebody who comes at it from a purely rational perspective. Any true religion needs to match with reality. We've talked about that before. And like any powerful scientific theory, it has to have explanatory power, right? So I always tell this story when it comes up in a talk or otherwise. When Einstein came up with his theory of relativity, he knew it was true. And he didn't really feel the need for it to be tested because he knew it was true. And the reason he knew it was true was because it explained so many things that he was trying to figure out how to explain in one comprehensive framework, right? It not only made sense for what it explained a lot of other stuff, right? So a religion that is true should not only just explain something for my group of people, but it should explain a lot of things, right? So it has explanatory power. And ultimately, right, the value of any scientific truth is it has predictive power, right? So, we predict the weather. We can tell, for some reason, you can tell 10 days what my weather's going to be. It's not always right, but it's pretty impressive how accurate it is. And that's because you understand the science behind it, the laws that are there, because we've tested them and found them to be true over time. And now a true belief has predictive power, not only explanatory power, but also has predictive power. It predicts things that come to be true, right? So in some ways, I was just putting these thoughts together as biking through Scotland. And this is what I came upon. Now, Baha'u'llah, in many of his passages, encourages us to really look at the world and think about it, and he says, we shouldn't be hesitant to look at the reality of the world, because the reality of the world is a wonderful thing. And Baha'u'llah says, look at the world and ponder on it. It unveils the book of its own self before thine eyes, and reveals that which the pen of thy Lord, the fashioner, the all-informed, hath inscribed therein. And, one of the things I think that has been poisoning, I think, to our modern thinking is this break between science and religion. The idea, and it stems out of the 19th century debates, that the more we learn about the world, the less it'll seem like it's spiritual in quality, and or that, you know, it's going to be the kind of outcome as we see our ways in the universe, our place in the universe as being a positive thing. But Baha'u'llah tells us, no, you should look at it and you should see God within it, right? And so that's such a different perspective, right? And so, you know, I think one of the first questions that you ask when you think about truth and reality and you start exploring religion is, does God exist? And I'm not going to give a talk about why, whether God exists. I read a lot of books about this when I was younger. I remember reading this really big tome by Hans Kuhn, who was a Catholic philosopher, theologian, called Does God Exist? I think that's what it was called. And some of you may know it. It's a really big book. And he goes through all of the philosophers all through the years, centuries, about that it addressed this question of God, does God exist? And I read the whole thing. And, you know, but it was interesting because I heard all of their arguments. Some of them I found okay. I mean, it was okay. But, you know, I think one of the things that has ultimately led me to believe in God and continue to believe in God is a feeling I had probably when I was 12 years old, when I first encountered the idea of atheism, and I found it very odd because I just looked at the world and I looked at what humans can do in the world, and I thought, that just doesn't match with what I see, because what I see is a group of beings in humans that have arisen out of nature, who are intelligent and who are able to explain to themselves an intelligible world, meaning the world has rational rules and principles. That doesn't come from an irrational source, right? And so that basic sort of intuitive thing has kept, I believe, I've done a couple of talks on this, explained it in different, using different metaphors and analogies. But, you know, reality, at the end of the day, the more I study the world, both in science, the more I was just overwhelmingly impressed by how magnificent it was, and how intelligent it was all put together, and how just, you know, I remember studying the cell when we were studying the cell in medical school and the basic molecular processes, and how dynamic it was, and just, it's amazing. It's remarkable. And then folks say, oh, it just came because of evolutionary processes. I mean, okay, yes, that may be true, but that's not what I'm trying to get at here. At the root of it, the world is intelligent, and it's intelligible to us, which is not an insignificant thing, because we come from that same place. And because the world is intelligible to us, and we have brought in, that's something very significant. So I'm not going to go into that in detail. But what I do think is that a lot of the reason people don't believe in God, and I see this in the scientists I hear and others that talk about their beliefs, is they really haven't found a way to believe in God. It's not that they feel like it's been disproven. Nietzsche was way ahead of himself, and I don't even think he believed it. But it's more that I think that people have lost their way in a way to think about God in a way that makes sense to them. And that's where the Baha'i Faith comes in, because the Baha'i Faith has given us, I think, a way to think about God and us in relation to God in a way that makes a lot of sense and is consistent with the modern experience and the experience of the world. And, you know, for those of you who have heard my talks, you know that I use this slide quite a bit. But, you know, Baha'u'llah tells us that we are living in a creation that is like living in a painting. And if you are living in the two-dimensional world of the painting, you can't really know the painter. So that what the atoms and molecules that live within that painting are never going to know that young lady who's doing the painting, right? So they may, and what they will, only thing they will see is the paintbrush, right? And so that's what they'll see. They'll see that the will of that painter acting in that painting through the paintbrush, which dynamically creates the world, right? But from their perspective, the paintbrush is God, right? They're not going to see anything else other than that. And what Baha'u'llah tells us is that God is unknowable to us in that same way. Our consciousness simply does not have the capacity to encompass the nature of God, because we are encompassed by the nature of God, right? We are so encompassed by it that we simply don't have the mental or any other capacity to surround God in a way that could make it explanatory to us, could make God explanatory to us. So God is unknowable. So the best we do is to see God in all of creation, like you would if you were living in the painting. You would see the other aspects of the painting as reflecting the painter, but we can also see the will of God as it works in the world. And so that will is mostly expressed through the messengers of God and the revelations of God that I mentioned early. I love this quote from Islam, from the son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad, who Ali ibn Talib, who was there's a wonderful book called The Peaks of Eloquence, which those of you of Persian background probably know it. It's a Shia book primarily, but it is translated into English, and you can get it on Amazon. And it's talks and stories and other things about the son-in-law of the prophet. And really wonderful. I enjoyed it very much. I mean, it was very meaningful for me to read it. And I came upon this quote, or this passage in one of the sermons of Ali. And he said, God is not like any object that the human mind can conceive. No attribute can be ascribed to him which bears the least resemblance to any quality of which human beings have perception from their knowledge of material objects. He is with every object, not from resemblance or nearness. He is outside everything, but not from separation or indifference towards his creatures. He works and creates, but not in the meaning of motions or actions. He has no relation to matter, time, and space. So I love that. I love that. And in some ways, it's the most clear discussion of how God works in the world that I've ever heard. The Baha'i writings have many passages also that reflect that. You know, God is really unknowable to us on that level, right? And so what Baha'u'llah taught is the closest we can get to God is to see the paintbrush acting in the world. And the paintbrush acting in the world is reflected in these revelations of God that have formed the great religions of humanity. Now, we have to kind of step back and recognize that the great religions of humanity were pretty big deals, right? So, and still reverberate today, right? I mean, Christ's revelation, which was only 3 years that he taught, the Gospels are pretty small. It's kind of more like a pamphlet. It's a small book when you just take out the parts that just relate to Jesus. You know, created a civilization that has lasted 2,000 years and has really become the moral and spiritual foundations of that great civilization of what we call, Western civilization. And, it still reverberates today, even though the founders of America and of Canada and other places had sought to sort of distance themselves to some degree from religion. They were very much informed by the moral and spiritual principles of Christianity and to some degree what's in the Hebrew Bible as well. And so, and we still see that today, and so these revelations don't just form religions, they form civilizations. And what we see now, if somebody is a Muslim, they are descendant of a people who were part of the Islamic civilization. And if somebody is Jewish, they were formed from a group people that were part of the Hebrew civilization and have stuck to that all through the centuries. Many, of course, have subsequently became Christians or Muslims. And so, what we have in the world in modern reality is that, everybody is a child of these revelations in many ways, right? And so their impact is immeasurable. And so Baha'u'llah says that these revelations actually had the same source and purpose, that of unity and the spiritual and moral development of all people. Now, it's interesting because we see these religions as being divisive. but that's only because of our perspective. If you were living in a tribal world of let's say the 9th century or the 10th century, and Islam came in, it was viewed as a much more evolved religion, right? So when the gee whiz, blanking. When Baghdad was sacked, it was 1100, something like that, something in that period. Wasn't the Huns? I'm blanking. Somebody out there knows it. But they adopted. They sacked Baghdad, took over that area and a lot of what was now the Muslim world, and they became Muslims. So it was a situation where people they conquered a people and then adopted their religion. And the reason they adopted their religion is they saw it as a more evolved religion of the one they had, right? And so it was a unifying force. Islam was a unifying force. If you're a tribal person and you know some Christians and you know some Jews, but there are a lot of tribal religions around, and Islam comes into your understanding and you meet somebody who's a Muslim and they say, well, all of these religions are true. Judaism is true and Christianity is true. And even the tribal religions, we're all worshiping the same God. It's a unifying thing. And that's what Islam was. And that unity created a foundation, a moral and spiritual foundation, but it also got people on the same page about stuff. And then they were able to build a great civilization together. So it was incredibly unifying. We don't see things that way now because these religions have sort of played out and now they're up against each other. But in the spaces in which they occupied, they were incredibly powerful and unifying. So that's my point on the unity of religion, that if we see them as divisive, largely it's because we don't see them in their historical context. But it does get to the point that the revelations are revealed upon the capacity of humanity at that time in history, and they are evolutionary, building upon the truths of previous revelations. As much as I love the Gospels and I enjoyed reading the Quran and got so much out of it, I did feel like it was kind of older, and I'm a modern person. So there's a lot of stuff in there that doesn't seem very modern, right? And that's not because it's wrong. It's just it was revealed for people who lived hundreds of years before me, right? So, and we also have to recognize that each religion, each revelation of God takes on the character to some degree of the people to whom it's revealed, right? So the language, the context of, and so forth. But Baha'u'llah tells us that despite those differences in time, but also in sort of form, the underlying truths are all the same, and they all represent the Word of God. It's just that humans evolve, okay? And Baha'u'llah tells us that God's desire is that for now we see the whole perspective, right? We recognize their fundamental oneness and not separate ourselves based on the superficial aspects of religion. He says every one of them is a way of God that connects this world to the realms above, and the standards of his truth unto everyone in the kingdoms of earth and heaven. They are the manifestations of God, meaning the messengers of God amidst men, the evidence of his truth and the signs of his glory. So, if we really want to ask the question, does God exist and does God act in the world? Yes, God acts in the world, and he acts through these great religions, which is, of course, what everybody thought to begin with, because that's why we believe in God. We wouldn't believe in God if it weren't for, or we wouldn't have a conception of God if it weren't these revelations of God sort of translating an unknowable reality into a reality that is knowable and understandable for us, right? So, one of the wonderful things about the Baha'i writings, though, is that Baha'u'llah addresses so many different aspects of our relationship to God. Some folks have a very they grow up within a perspective, and they know God through the formal school. They may go to Hebrew school, or they go, to a Christian school, and they sort of know things on a formal level. Other peoples, have a more naturalistic appreciation of the world, right? Or Hinduism and Buddhism in particular focused on the inner journey, the inner path, right? Baha'u'llah addresses all of these things, but beyond that, he says all of them are true, right? So it's not just the diversity of these individual religions. It's the fact that, God is really part of the life of every human being on some level, even if they've never even heard of these revelations. And so, because they're surrounded by the evidence of God's reality, and they may relate to that less in the church and more outside. I had a friend of mine once told me, he said, "Oh, my wife goes to church," and he said, "I go outside and I take a walk. That's my temple." And I remember him saying that, and of course that's true, right? That's absolutely true, because the world speaks of the reality of God. In fact, it's probably a better representation than anything else humans could create, right? So I love the idea that in the Baha'i Faith, there's also this diversity of ways to understand God, and it largely depends on people's own sort of sensibilities, if you will. And these have been identified in the various cultures and paths of God we see in the world. And some people really migrate to, say, more what they might, a Buddhist path. But, that all fits within the perspective that Baha'u'llah has given us. And I would also argue then that the greatest proof of the truth of these religions I mentioned before, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, is the Baha'i Faith. And the reason I say that is because the Baha'i Faith gives them all a coherent way to be understood. Because I don't think they do it themselves. I don't think they present at least to me, a coherent way for me to believe in them. But through Baha'u'llah, I believe in each of them. And it's because they make sense within their historical context. And when I understand them within their historical context, I can love them and appreciate them without having them be everything to a modern world, which I struggle to see them as that. But so I always find that when I'm thinking about this issue and hearing my Christian brothers and sisters in particular supporting their religion, I think to myself, if they took up a high perspective, it would be a lot more convincing, because then I can really relate to the Gospels, So that's just a thought. Now I have to look and see what time I have, because I've lost track and I am way over. All right, so I am going to move very quickly. Now,
we started very late.
Oh, you did? Okay, thank you, Feroz. All right, so I will fit. I don't think I have only about 4 or 5 more slides. So the other thing that one asks oneself is, when you're thinking about a true religion, is what are its teachings, and do they match with reality? Are they predictive? Are they coherent? Are they do they have explanatory power? And do they predict things, right? So Baha'u'llah and his son Abdu'l-Baha, who came to this country in the United States and Canada, and gave talks in Britain and France and other places. He enunciated the social principles that arose out of Baha'u'llah's teachings, that were also in Baha'u'llah's teachings, but Abdu'l-Baha sort of linked them to the Western ideas. And so, his talks in America and Canada are captured in a book called The Promulgation of Universal Peace. And if you read that, there's a lot of repetition, because he's giving a talk in Cincinnati, say, and then he gives it in Pittsburgh. But he hits on many of the same ideas. And these ideas are what are the foundational ideas of Baha'u'llah's revelation. And I would say these are the foundational ideas of the civilization that Baha'u'llah's faith will produce. So that is
I can't anymore, but I still have a lot to do, but it's been a day.
I can hear you all.
Deborah is talking. Deborah, you need to mute yourself,
Yeah,
please.
I did. I muted her. Sorry, I apologize.
I don't mind. It's lovely to hear everyone else's voice. But I don't want to feel like I'm talking over folks. So think about these ideas in relation to the modern world and how salutary, meaning how beneficial they would be if we all embrace them, if we embrace the absolute and fundamental equality of all the members of the human race. By that, even, equal rights, privileges, and so forth. The full equality of men and women and the importance of women engaging with the full range of human endeavor. The promotion of world citizenship and the establishment of institutions that support and coordinate a unified planet, okay? The promotion of science, truth, and knowledge. Encourage everyone to develop their minds, to individually investigate truth, avoid blind adherence to traditions and ideas of the past that may no longer match with the world. Remember, I said some beliefs are true, they just don't quite match the modern world. And so they're only partially true. They get some traction on them, but you can't really make a ton of progress. And they're not going to necessarily hold everybody together. One of the perils that keeps people apart is the extremes of wealth and poverty. Doesn't mean Baha'is are communist. It means that Baha'is believe that poverty can keep people down from a full expression of their ability to fulfill themselves as human beings, and at least the extremes of poverty should be eliminated. That we should focus on the true nature of religion as a builder of unity, and not the differences and distinctions and tribal arguments that are out there about it, but that we should focus on the fundamental unity of all religions. So you ask yourself, would this be good for our world, right? Would it produce productive results? Let's take one of them, where Baha'u'llah said women and men have been and will always be equal in the sight of God, right? So since we have now, Baha'u'llah said that in the late 1800s. It was a somewhat radical idea at the time. It was 40 years or so before women would get the right to vote in the United States, maybe 50 years. So that was a long way off, even for so-called, developed countries, right? And the status of women in other countries was even worse than the U.S. But what has happened to the countries that adopted this principle? They've seen improved economic development, include socioeconomic health status. They've seen a faster increase in their overall education of their population if they educated women. They've seen lower population growth, which is critical for dealing with the environmental crisis. It's empowered a different voice in their affairs as a nation and as in world affairs. It's been an extraordinarily productive idea. It's been predictive and produced good results that are demonstrably good. And so, that's what I mean by when ideas are true. When principles are true, they produce productive results. And this is just one of the principles of Baha'u'llah that we're playing out, producing so many good results. But, the power of Baha'u'llah's faith, I think, is in its unifying quality. And its unifying quality arises from, I believe, its truth. It's universal. And it allows everybody to live within a common framework.
Written.
So Baha'u'llah talks in his passage, he said, of old it has been revealed love of one's country is an element of the faith of God. But he says now the revelation is the tongue of grandeur spoken and proclaimed, that it is not to boast who loveth this country, but it is his who loveth the world. Through the power released by these exalted words, he hath lent a fresh impulse and set a new direction to the birds of men's hearts, and hath obliterated every trace of restriction and limitation from God's holy book. So there's no limitation anymore in who you can love, who you can care about, who you can serve, because we're all, whatever background, whatever civilization, ancient civilization we happen to be descended from, we are all living in the same world, and there is no restriction in our love and serving of all people, right? That is now an element of the faith of God, the most dominant and powerful idea in creation, right? And Baha'u'llah says, we ask God to graciously grant that all may evince such fairness of character, such goodliness of deed and kindliness of word, as will meet God's good pleasure. It hath been decreed that the citadels of men's hearts should be subdued through the host of a noble character and praiseworthy deeds. Contention, discord, strife, and sedition have all been forbidden, in the book of God. He calls on his followers to be like a lump that must leaven the peoples of the world. He says they must show forth such trustworthiness, such truthfulness and perseverance, such deeds and character that all mankind may profit by their example. And in a famous passage, he said, in matters of religion, every form of fanaticism, hatred, dissension, and strife is strictly forbidden. In the revelations of the past, it's not been as clear that when we talk about loving each other, it meant people, all people, right? Baha'u'llah is so clear in these passages that this is a universal religion, right? And it should be spread in a universal way. You know, when he refers in that last passage, he's talking about the spread of his faith. He says it should not be through guns, through conquering or through any of that. It needs to be done. People need to be, their hearts need to be conquered, and they need to be conquered by your noble example, right? So, and I love this passage, so fundamental in the Baha'i faith. He says, "O you children of men, the fundamental purpose animating the faith of God and his religion is to safeguard the interest and promote the unity of the human race, and to foster the spirit of love and fellowship among men. Suffer it not to become a source of dissension and discord, of hate and enmity. This is the straight path, the fixed and immovable foundation. Whatsoever is raised on this foundation, the changes and chances of the world can never impair its strength, nor will the revolution of countless centuries undermine its structure," right? So when you build a house, the first thing you do is build a foundation that you know won't move, right? And then you build your house on that foundation. And that's what Baha'u'llah said the fundamental foundation of the revelation of God in this time, of his faith and all of its teachings. It is there to safeguard the interest and promote the unity of the human race and to foster the spirit of love and fellowship, right? So that's the part that shouldn't move. And no matter what we build on that, and I'm sure there'll be a diversity of things through the centuries that will build on that, that's the foundational idea, right? And I'm going to leave you with a couple ideas that when I think about these great civilizations that have come from these revelations, I think about a tree. Every year I go to Florida to do some lectures, and we often end up at Disney. And there's this great place that's the Avatar, that movie Avatar years ago, not The Last Airbender, which is also quite excellent, but this movie about all these people living in this tree, you know, the tree of life, and becoming dependent upon this tree. And I think about that in a sense of how we as people are struggling to find our tree that we need to live under, right? And so I love this image from that perspective, because, and the thing that makes that tree great are these beautiful ideas and teachings where Baha'u'llah says the tabernacle of unity has been raised. Regard you not one another as strangers. You are the fruits of one tree and the leaves of one branch. Verily I say, whatever leads to the decline of ignorance and the increase of knowledge hath been and will ever remain approved in the sight of the Lord of creation. So I'm going to skip through a couple of things, and then I'm going to finish with this one. Because it kind of gets to this idea of a tree as well, that you can live within it. And the Baha'i Faith is the most expansive and universal religion that has ever existed. I love living under its shadow and under its branches. Baha'u'llah said, "Sanctify your souls from whatsoever is not of God, and taste you the sweetness of rest within the pale of his vast and mighty revelation." So we're all living in that, under that tree. It's a small tree, but it's going to get a lot bigger. And it's just wonderful to be here. So thank you so much for listening to my comments tonight. I hope they were somewhat beneficial to you in some way.
Thank you so very much, Kendal. Oh, we have a question.
Yes.
Question.
Should I stop sharing, Firuz?
Yes, please.
Yep. Okay. There we go. Good.
Thank you so very much. Seraphim, are you here? Are you still here?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay. Do you want to read your question in the chat yourself?
Well, I mean, I have many complex questions. First of
I
all,
understand.
yeah, I'm an instructor of comparative religion and a student at the Wilmette Institute getting a certificate in Baha'i studies. So I have many in-depth academic questions that I don't want to bore the friends with here. So I'm just wondering if there's some way to get in contact with Dr. Williams in a separate venue so that we could kind of go through. I mean, it would take several hours to ask the questions I have about this most excellent presentation.
Oh, that's awesome, Seraphim. Yeah, we can share. I see your email there.
Okay.
You know what I'll do? I'll write it down and I'll send you I'll send you an email from my email.
Great.
And then we can have a dialogue. That would be great.
Wonderful. And I just really want to appreciate this is one of the best presentations on the intellectual aspect of the Baha'i Faith that I've seen. So I'm really looking forward to speaking with you further.
Oh, that's great. The Baha'i Faith is the most intellectually stimulating thing I've ever experienced. I mean, you know, I did an undergraduate education and I went to a liberal arts college, Haverford College outside of Philadelphia. And, you know, it had a great philosophy department and a religion department and history. And I took all of those courses and I majored in biology because mostly because I was doing pre-med and I knew I could get all of I had done most of the requirements for doing biology major. And I knew if I just knocked out a couple more, I would have the freedom to take all these other courses. So I took all these other courses. And the reason I took all those other courses is because I was really trying to understand the Baha'i Faith because it was so broad and comprehensive that, I mean, you know, you just gained insights. And I think to some degree I was still testing it out a little bit, making sure I hadn't missed something in my appreciation of it. And then, you know, it set me off on an intellectual journey. There's a beautiful passage of Baha'u'llah that I cannot find, and some of you may know it, but he talks about how he has sent down that which will stimulate your minds and enrich your souls, or something to that effect. But he talks about how it will stimulate your mind. And, you know, just the process of trying to understand Baha'i scripture. And what does this mean? And what does that mean? They're so brilliant, you know, brilliantly put together that as you're struggling to find them, it's an intellectual exercise in itself. And it's just a wonderful thing. It's a connection between your soul and your mind. So I look forward to talking to you about the journey.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely a friend of the Baha'i and have been for many years, but it seems like you have a lot of answers to questions that I've also had for many years. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Seraphim, it's good for you to come on weekly basis.
I've been trying, but I'm quite busy. But this is wonderful.
Okay.
I was here last week too, by the way, when you weren't here, Furuzcan.
Thank you very much for that answer. I wasn't well. Okay. Thank you. I apologize, Seraphim. Thank you. By the way, Kendal, Seraphim answered to the question that you forgot, and he put in the chat January 29th, 1258 by Mongols.
Mongols, yes. Thank you. Yeah. Mongols. I was like, it wasn't the Huns. Which one of those? They sacked Rome.
That's all right. They're easy to confuse.
Yeah, no, I know. I couldn't, my mind just couldn't pick it up. Of course, yes. But that was actually a fascinating fact. I remember reading about that and how they all basically sacked it, took over it, destroyed it. And then as they started to make themselves governors of the area, they said, you know, this Islam is pretty cool. We're going to make ourselves all Muslims. And they became all Muslim, which I don't think has ever happened in history. That the conquerors took the religion of the conquered. But I think it was just a reflection of the intellectual and spiritual power of Islam at that time in history.
Definitely a turning point in Islamic history.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
There is a message to me, and he is asking if he can have your email because he has the same questions.
Oh, sure. All right.
Okay.
I guess I should probably.
I have your email. I can share it, or do you want to?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Do you have my Gmail, Farouz? Yeah.
I don't know. Did I send
Yeah,
you?
yeah. Whenever we reached out by email, that's fine.
Okay.
I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, please, if you.
Now, I am a busy doctor, and I just want to caveat that my I think it would be maybe we could set up a call. But I see patients every day, all day, and everything else. So we just have to figure out how to structure it in a way that we can enjoy. I mean, I would learn from all of you.
Thank you so very much, Kendall. It was magnificent. I really,
great.
really appreciate it. And I'm sure that the rest of the friends would echo what I say. We have a question, and we will keep the questions short so the friends can ask their questions. Sharajun, go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you so much.
Mm.
Truly enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
I just want to mention that I see religions as a family affair. What I mean is that I think they're all related. One cannot be without the other.
Yeah.
So I believe very deeply that without Abraham, Moses couldn't come. Without Moses, Christ couldn't come. Without Christ, Muhammad couldn't come. And without all of that, Baha'u'llah and the Bab couldn't come. And I feel that every one of them have said, I'm the ultimate. And it makes sense to me. I don't think that that aspect of the religions is untrue, because at that moment, they were the ultimate. They were the only way. And so does Baha'u'llah say that.
Yeah,
So
sure.
I sort of wonder, in 1,000 years, when we have a woman who says, I am the ultimate, and you can only know God through me, I wonder how many of the Baha'is will recognize that. So I think we are one. So I'm wondering how you see that in terms of what you were speaking.
You know, I think of this statement of Jesus, I am the way, the truth, the life, and nobody gets to the Father but through me, which is completely understandable from Baha'i theology. That is the basis of Baha'i theology, right? That we come to know the nature of God primarily through his messengers, right? And for Jesus to say that, you know, when Jesus said that, everybody thought he was just a carpenter, son of a carpenter, roaming around the villages of what is now Israel, around Jerusalem. And, you know, he was just a guy, right? He says, you know, I am the way, the truth, the life, and nobody gets to the Father but through me. That was a remarkable thing to say at the time. And, you know, and I think it makes perfect sense that so it's wonderful if you're not, if you've come from a Baha'i background and you know the idea of progressive revelation and you've read these things, it's actually really wonderful to go back to the Gospels and read them. Because there are things that are expressed in there that are really expressed in a beautiful way, and they make perfect sense. Yeah. So, Shakla, I agree with you completely. It really helped me to understand the Baha'i writings, to study Hinduism and Buddhism, because they came at it from a different perspective. When I looked at the writings, I saw them from a Western Christian perspective, right? And then when I studied Buddhism and thought through some of the issues in Buddhism, that it challenges it presents, and how to think about the world, then I went back to the writings, and all of a sudden you can understand the seven valleys. So you're right. They're all a family. It's wonderful.
I would also add Zoroaster and also the First Nations. I don't know how you look at that, because I find every time I look at the belief in the First Nation, I see more and more of the jointness of every one of them in what is now Baha'u'llah's message for us.
Yeah, I absolutely. And there's a couple of passages that just have struck me over the years in relation to this idea. The one is in Tabernacle of Unity, which is a set of letters back and forth between Baha'u'llah and an old Zoroastrian friend of his from his Iraqi days. And, his Zoroastrian friend, of course, did not come out of a Judeo-Christian Islamic background and spent most of his life in India. So he was very in tune with Hinduism, and he asked Baha'u'llah really interesting questions from that perspective. And, he sort of outlined for Baha'u'llah in his question, like 4 ways to think about God. He says, is God like a God that sends prophets to the world? That was the one. I've forgotten all the details. The other one was, is God sort of everything? Is God just dissolved into the reality of the world and doesn't have an independent existence from the reality of the world? Like God is basically in this key cup, sort of a real sort of pantheistic perspective. Or has God, set the world in motion and sort of gone and made himself a cup of coffee and is no longer paying attention? I mean, there's like these different models that he asked Baha'u'llah about. And it's very interesting because Baha'u'llah doesn't discount any of them. He says they're all accurate in many ways, right? It's kind of depends on how you think about it, right? And he says the first one, where God says messengers of God into the world, is the closest to piety, he says, but the others have their arguments. So, my point is there are different ways of understanding God. There's another passage, there's a Baha'i who I don't know personally, but he translated some things, Will McCants, who translated for on his website. I don't think it's any longer active, but he translated a passage I found really interesting, that Baha'u'llah was asked about paradise and hell, and he said, paradise and hell, in the traditional sense, means closeness to the messengers of God and distance from them. He said, but in reality, then he says, he broadens it out further, and he says, but in reality, paradise and hell exists for every soul in every moment of time, because it's always this connection between God, irrespective of any of that, right? And so, you mentioned the First Nations people and I'm attracted to that. This is the kind of thing that I say the Baha'i Faith has many different ways to approach this, because they're all true, right? And so I think one of the things that it helps us do is to really expand our conception of God, right? And Baha'u'llah has really helped sort of pry open my conception of God to, it's everything. It's just everything you know, everything you've ever thought, everything you've ever known is a reflection of God. And so that's not exclusive to any one person or any one religion.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Before we go to George, there is a question by Dr. Ziai in the chat. Would you please repeat the name of the book by Imam Ali?
The Peaks of Eloquence.
The Peaks of Eloquence.
Yes, The Peaks of Eloquence. Let me see. Let me see here. Escape.
I take the opportunity to welcome Alice. Alice, thank you so much for being here. We love you, and we will start the devotional with you in about 15 minutes. Don't go away.
So this is the book. It was compiled in the centuries after Ali, The Peak of Eloquence. It's available on Amazon. And so I was just, I could share the screen and show it to you, but nevertheless, I think it's easier just to tell you to Google that, or Amazon, go on Amazon or anywhere else you get books and put it in there, and it's available in English.
Thank you.
Yeah. The author is not Ali, by the way. The author is the compiler. whose name I can't pronounce, or I could try, but it would probably be wrong, and I don't want to do that in a public forum.
Thank you, Kendall. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
George, please go ahead. I apologize for the delay.
Oh, that's okay. It was just something very simple, but I sort of took it off because everything went on so far. But I only had two comments. And the first one was that it's really refreshing to have an intellectual approach to how religion evolves and the interests of the Baha'i faith. But what the sad thing was that I thought of religion in most cases as an accident of birth.
Yeah.
You know, that was sad. People aren't looking. It's where they were born. If you were born in Saudi Arabia, you would be a Muslim. If you were
Yeah.
born in Iran, you'd probably be a Muslim, maybe a Baha'i. You know, and so there's not a lot of searching that has gone on in most cases with religion. It's an accident of birth. The only other thing I wanted to mention was, didn't the Romans become Christians eventually?
Yes, of course. Yes, surely.
Okay.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and seat of their religion in Rome was for centuries, right? Yeah, I suppose you're right. The conquered becoming. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Just a comment.
Yeah, no, George, you're right. Yeah, I didn't ever thought about it that way, because the Romans didn't sort of conquer an existing Christian country and then become Christian. Christianity sort of arose within it.
But they were trying to put an end to it, really. So.
But they were, yeah, sure. And you're right. You're absolutely right. Christianity ended up winning the day, didn't it? Just like, Islam ended up winning the day against the Mongols.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
If nobody else has a question, I wanted to ask you a quick question. You talk about people of different religions like Islam or something, they came to the West and they changed the dynamics of that countries. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Yes. So, let me see if I can. Okay. Well, I think there's an example happening right now. As many of you know, the largest city in America, New York City, which I think is the largest city, or at least the most impactful, just elected a Shia Muslim as its mayor, right? And a very eloquent, talented young man. And but if you see the rhetoric against him, it's not completely for his ideas, although he does have some political ideas that are somewhat anti-establishment. He regards himself as a social democrat, right? Socialist, democratic socialist or something like that. But nevertheless, I mean, the fact that he's a Muslim and is now the mayor of that large city, and there's a lot of I think a lot of open bias that's been expressed to him about him because he is a Muslim. And of course, that goes against the principles of how the United States was formed. But there's a lot of forces that see America as being a Judeo-Christian sort of place. And what do you do when, more and more Muslims develop leadership positions within the society? That's what I was getting at, Firuz, is this clash of civilizations. It was a lot easier intellectually when people saw them as different, and separate. But many the Middle Eastern countries, the Islamic countries of the Middle East have developed considerably, have integrated very much with the West in many ways. More and more, I'm sure that will continue over the next few decades. And will challenge the tribal instincts of, these Western countries in Europe being Judeo-Christian. That's the environment in which the faith answers so many questions, right? Because you can't solve this problem bickering back and forth. I was watching I'm sorry to go off on this, but I was watching a CNN discussion. CNN has these people that that's what they do, right? They get people together and they talk about stuff, political stuff usually. But they were talking about Israel and and it struck me as I was listening. I said, "This is like the Crusades, you know? Everybody, it's just like the Crusades. Everybody's just trying to fight over who owns that piece of land in that spot, right? And who's going to be the dominant force in it? Is it going to be sort of the Muslim world or the Judeo-Christian world? Who's going to have it?" And you know, I had thought we'd sort of evolved beyond that, but we haven't, right? And it's playing out in our political universe that's very much that's part of the whole perspective that's going on there. And so I think that these clash of civilizations is still very much a real thing.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sorry,
My
Kendall,
other
wanted to answer.
question before I ask Nasrin June to speak is that when a new religion happens in a country, let's say the Baha'i Faith in Iran, does that actually change the dynamics of that country?
Yeah, sure. I think so. I don't speak Persian or Farsi, but I do follow mostly through Twitter and other places and hear the talks given by some of the leaders in Iran and the perspective. And some of you, of course, follow that much more closely than me. I hear reverberations of the Baha'i Faith sometimes in their words. And it's very interesting to me because I hear it. It's not all the time. And, you know, usually they're talking about something unrelated. But occasionally it comes out and you wonder how much influence is going on there behind the scenes that they wouldn't admit to, you know. So the revelations of God have this power. They're true, right? I mean, that's the thing. They're true. And remember my principle, reality always wins, right? So, you know, when Baha'u'llah said he's going to, he talks about, there's this, I can't remember the exact quote, but it strikes me, you know, he says, basically, we have empowered my followers with the power of truth, right? And reality truth always wins, right? So reality always wins. So, you know, eventually it seeps out, right? And it gets out there, which is why I think it's so important for us as Baha'is to enunciate our truths to all kinds of folks of different backgrounds, because they'll think about them. They'll think about them when we're not there, and they'll study it on their own. And, you know, it's like a flood that goes out, you know, it slowly percolates. So I don't know. I wonder, I see Iran as changing, but maybe that's just my overly optimistic nature. But I see more and more that Baha'i vibe coming out of there. So
Inshallah,
yeah.
God willing. There is something from Jane. It said, I'm hearing many comparisons to the mayor of London, who is Muslim Indian. Most street signs there have Arabic and English lettering.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Somebody pointed out something I saw. I believe the mayor of LA is also Muslim. Is that right? One of the larger cities, which I didn't know. But, you know, we should embrace talented people and people who are committed to service and social progress and whatever background they come from.
Thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. The last question, and then we'll go to our prayers. Nasrin Khanum, please go ahead.
Allah Akbar, dear Mr. Fruz, Mrs. Fruz, and dear Dr. William. Thank you so much. It's so wonderful. I have a question. Maybe I had two questions. One of them is, with your experience, do you think which way the best way for teaching the Baha'i faith, and even the person didn't accept God, and in our present society, many people we saw didn't accept the God. How to teaching the faith to them.
Yeah, I think that
Thank
yeah,
you, Nasiha. Go
very,
ahead.
very good question. You know, if I had not known of the faith, had not had the opportunity to really explore it, I'm not sure I'd believe in God. It probably wouldn't be an active belief. It would be a passive one. I would feel a kinship with people who believe in God, but I don't think I would be an active member of any one religion. I'm not sure. It's maybe kind of one of those lax people who go to church every couple of years. The reason is because, you know, I don't know, it wouldn't have made sense to me. You know, I would like the kinship of folks, but it might not make sense. So that's where people are coming from. They don't know, right? And so, but when you start to know and you start to connect, it really changes your mind about the existence of God. I mean, Baha'u'llah has convinced me that God exists. That's my point. I didn't hear convincing arguments until I started reading the Baha'i writings. So, you know, people don't know. And so that's why I think we just need to share with them things. We're our best friends from this area just moved to Colorado, and you know, the husband is from Florida, grew up in sort of a non-traditional Christian background, but not very religious. His wife grew up in a Catholic Korean family, and they both became Baha'is. And it's been wonderful to see them sort of grow in the faith. And they came from a not so religious background, but you know, just the connectedness they felt with Baha'is was very significant. And then, you know, over the years, things grow. Your perspective changes, and so I think we need to just let people allow them to grow.
You have to.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.